Good afternoon. My name is Lieutenant Commander Jamey Eklund. I'm a pediatric anesthesiologist at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. And because I'm talking as a physician today and not in an official capacity, I do have to give the disclaimer that the views expressed in my presentation are those of the author and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Department of the Navy, Department of Defense, nor the U.S. government. And today I'll be talking about the Navy Health Professions Scholarship Program that's offered to help students pay for medical school. So you want to become a physician. It's a noble thing to take on. It embraces the core values of the military and the Navy especially: honor, courage, and commitment. The honor to care for people during vulnerable points in their lives, courage to maintain integrity, admit to mistakes, and accept responsibility for such a huge undertaking, and basically to commit yourselves to a lost decade in that medical school internship and residency with all the missed holidays, family gatherings, weddings, funerals, and so forth. Dr. Eklund's mantra number one: this ain't TV, folks, this is the real world. Unfortunately, I think a lot of undergraduate students still have the perception of that being a physician is something like TV. And unfortunately, we deal with a lot more intense issues, family dynamics, end-of-life issues, and we are not compensated anywhere near what the actors in these programs are compensated. The reality is that physician compensation in 2012 from the Medscape survey of physicians shows that we're making a pretty good salary, with orthopedics being the top of the chart of over $400,000 as the average respondent to the survey, and pediatricians being down at the bottom end of $173,000. And again, this is just average, with the surgical subspecialties being toward the upper half and primary care specialties being more toward the bottom half. Looking at different practice settings, academic setting, physicians tend to make lower salaries than those that are working for large hospitals or multi-specialty group practices. Those that are partners in private practice still tend to make larger salaries than those that are employees of hospitals or that own their own practice. But with the Affordable Care Act coming on board this year, things are going to be changing drastically, and reimbursement to physicians will take a hit. Looking at all physicians, comparing men and women, we have men still making about $60,000 more a year than women, and in primary care, the average female physician is making $161,000, which seems like a lot of money, but in reality, it's not compared to the time and energy we've put into our education, as well as all the sacrifice. As a result, most physicians nowadays don't feel that they're properly compensated. 52% of physicians across the board feel that they're being cheated, and in primary care, it's still about 50-50. And I pulled up the data from 2011 and 2012 Medscape surveys. It's about the same amount of physicians that would choose the same specialty, 42%. But the number of people that would elect to pursue a career in medicine has dropped from 54 to 51%, and those choosing the same practice setting has dropped from 23 to 19%. The 2011 Medscape survey, or 2012, talked about physician dissatisfaction growing across all specialties. Only a fourth of internists and a third of family physicians would choose the same specialty. 46% of pediatricians would still choose to pursue their specialty. And about 23% of all physicians would choose the same practice setting, compared with 50% the year before. And I think that, again, as the Affordable Care Act begins to take place, this might drop even more, unfortunately. So for the average cost of the 2013-2014 school year, the average private school out-of-state tuition is almost $50,000. And the data that I have for public schools is actually from the 2011-2012 school year. I couldn't find new data other than that those numbers have gone up about 5% each year. So that's probably closer to $30,000 for an in-state public school and probably closer to $52,000 for an out-of-state public school, just to ballpark it. And that's still a lot of money, considering that a female physician pursuing primary care is making $160,000 a year before taxes. So looking at tuition from the Association of American Medical Colleges that's published for the 2012-2013 school year of just schools in the Chicagoland, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Illinois, Iowa area, you can see what tuition and fees are. I didn't put non-resident tuition and fees for the private schools because they're the same as the resident tuition and fees, and I didn't want the slide to become cluttered. Here, UIC is $37,764 for a resident of Illinois and almost $75,000 for a non-resident, which is an astronomical amount of money. Those expenses include tuition, but also other hidden expenses like living expenses, fees, and on top of that, transportation, rent, health insurance, books, internet, computers, and then also exam fees. The exam fees have gone up incredibly since I was in medical school. The total for the USMLEs is now almost $3,200, and for the 3 COMLEX tests combined, it's almost $2,000. So how do we pay for medical school? Well, some of us are lucky enough that we could ask our parents and family to give us cash. I unfortunately was not one of those students. Some of us choose to take private loans, which the interest is no longer able to be deferred during residency and fellowship. Those loans do come due the day after you graduate medical school, and the percentage on those loans has gone up considerably. When I graduated from medical school, if I would have had a loan, and if it was subsidized and if it was a public loan, it would have been about 3% loan. And now, from what I'm told, it's about 8%, which is incredibly high to defer interest for potentially 5 or 6 years and then start paying 8% on about $160,000 to $200,000. And that's not even including undergraduate debt. There are some private scholarships out there. For the students at University of Illinois Chicago College of Medicine, I'd like to point out the Nesbitt Scholarship, which is maintained at the National Bank and Trust Company out in Sycamore, Illinois. It's a medical school scholarship that's particularly aimed at female students. And then I'm sure there's other foundations that provide them as well. But I want to highlight today the Navy's Health Professions Scholarship Program as a very viable option for students to help defer the cost of medical school. Like I said, deferring the loan repayment does incur substantial cost. Between 1984 and 2004, which is 20 years, the cost of medical school tuition and fees in a private school increased 50%, which is a lot of money. But public schools increased 133%. From the class of 2012 medical students, the average student graduated with a debt of $166,750. And 86% of the class of 2012 will be carrying outstanding loans until they secure a job as an attending physician down the road. And this is significant because educational debt never goes away. Even if somebody declares bankruptcy, it never goes away. it's always going to be there looming in the background. And those loans can affect somebody's ability to secure a car loan, a loan for a home, or even to pursue additional educational opportunities. So comparing civilian life to military life, I wanted to point out some of the differences in civilian residencies. So as somebody that deferred my training, so I did an internship at Michigan State University in Kalamazoo. I did anesthesia residency at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and then fellowship at Children's Memorial here in Chicago. I earned a nominal resident salary, and out of that I had to pay FICA, Medicare, federal taxes, state taxes, and in Pittsburgh I had to pay a local borough tax of 1%. And then after my taxes, I still had to pay my own board exam fees, health insurance, premiums, deductibles, and copays, as well as any dental care that I needed if I had time to do that at the end of the day. People that take a military scholarship get paid significantly more. And I think that there's a lot of benefits to doing this scholarship that aren't just financial, but at the end of the day, money is the bottom line. So what is a Navy Health Profession Scholarship Program? Well, it's advertised as an individual ready reserve program for students that are accepted to or enrolled in an accredited training program leading to a health profession degree. So this is available for medical students, dental students, optometry students, podiatry students, clinical psychology, or some students pursuing master's degrees is for physician assistants. Today I'm going to be talking specifically for those of students pursuing medical degrees. So what are the benefits? Well, while in medical school, the Navy pays the entire tuition. There's no limit, so no matter what the medical school is charging for tuition, it's paid for. As of today, the monthly stipend is $2,157 every month, direct deposited into your checking account. And every year, there's 45 days of active duty pay, which amounts to about $4,500. And I'll get into the details of that in a minute. Currently, we have a $20,000 accession bonus for students that are accepting a 4-year commitment to the Navy, and other things that are reimbursed, such as required books and supplies, microscope rental, and the USMLE and COMLEX fees. What happens is the Navy has a contract with the medical school, and so there's no limit and there's no proration of the cost, meaning if the day you enter medical school it costs $75,000 and the tuition increases, then the Navy will continue to pay the increased medical school tuition. If a student decides to pursue this scholarship, he or she has until the last day of the first semester to be able to sign up for this scholarship, and the Navy will back pay all the way to the beginning of the semester. So like I said, all the required books and equipment are paid for, and there are some limits and some maximums for the equipment. They do have a cutoff for microscope rental. The Navy will pay for up to $500 a year to lease a computer, and that might sound kind of silly, but if the Navy were to pay for the computer, then the computer would become the property of the U.S. Navy and subject to search and all the other legal things that go along with that. So that's why they choose to lease it for the students. I already said the USMLEs and COMLEXs are paid for. Exceptions are the Navy won't purchase a computer, won't purchase pagers, cell phones, and PDAs, and that's also for the same reason. State and local taxes are the responsibility of the medical student. But here in the state of Illinois, if you have residency, you don't pay any state income tax. Illinois, Texas, Michigan, and I think Washington State and Florida are exempt from state income tax. So it sounds like a great deal. Dr. Eklund's mantra number 2 is that there is no such thing as a free lunch. So by taking all this money, there is a commitment that's involved, and it's a year-for-year commitment. Every year that a student takes the HPSP scholarship, the student has to pay back a year on active duty. But that's in a non-training status. The minimum obligated service time is 3 years, so even students that take a 1 or a 2-year scholarship still owe 3 years to the Navy. Anybody that chooses to take a $20,000 sign-on bonus incurs a 4-year commitment. Internship year does count toward paying, it does count toward the minimum service obligation, but it's not in part of the payback time. It's kind of like neutral time. Residency incurs a year-for-year training obligation as well, but it's paid off at the same time that the HPSP scholarship is paid off. So I have a little math example here of military math. So Sally Joe picks up a 4-year HPSP scholarship and then decides to attend medical school. So at the end of her during her 4th year of medical school, she matches into a Navy internship. All HPSP students for the Navy have to participate in the Navy match. So Sally Joe comes on active duty in June and then does her internship. Then the following July, she starts her Navy internal medicine residency. So she had a 4-year scholarship, which is 4 years of obligated service. Her 3 years of internal medicine residency plus her 4 years of obligated service means that she still owes 4 years of active duty after she finishes her residency as an active duty Navy internal medicine attending. So the 3-year residency didn't pay off an extra year of her scholarship. She still owes 4 years because the 4 years of the scholarship was greater than the 3 years of the medicine residency. So what do medical students do while they're in medical school if they take the HPSP scholarship? When I took the scholarship to pay for my school here at University of Illinois College of Medicine, I thought that when September 11th occurred and I was sitting in my cardiology lecture, that I was going to be pulled out of medical school and sent to the front lines to help defend our country, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Medical students are considered to be an inactive ready reserve component. So perhaps in the event of World War III, they might be called up at the same time that the draft is called up, but that's about it. What I was told from my recruiter was to just go to class and study hard and not to get into any trouble, because the military has this uniform code of military justice, which is kind of like our legal system. And even as an inactive ready reserve student, I was still held to those standards. So if I would have gotten a DUI or if I would have gotten a felony conviction somewhere, then I would have been handled in the military's legal system. But most medical students don't even have to worry about that. Every semester, I took in my reimbursement forms to the financial aid office so that they could sign off on the books that were required, and then that paperwork was sent to the Navy in order for me to be reimbursed. My stipend was directly deposited into my bank account every month, so I didn't have to worry about money, how I would get money. I had money to pay my rent without any problems. And then I had 45 days of active duty, which was called annual training, and that was a bigger lump of money. So what is annual training that medical students do? Basically, it's an opportunity to be paid a whole lot of money to go to officer development school the first year, which is not boot camp. It does not involve waking up at 4 a.m. It is living in a dormitory style housing with 2 people per dormitory room, going to class, learning about the history of the Navy, how the Navy hierarchy is run, what the customs and culture is of the Navy, how to properly wear a uniform, understanding rank and the rank structure, and also to meet other people that are in the same HPSP class. The second summer is spent studying or doing research or doing some sort of research clerkship. And then during the third and fourth years, during the fourth year of medical school, the third and fourth annual trainings are completed. The reason why the first one is done before October is because October 1st is the start of the new fiscal year for the military. And so one clerkship has to be done in one fiscal year and the other clerkship has to be done in another fiscal year. So a little bit about the research clerkships. These are the ones that are done for the second annual training. The military offers them undersea medicine, operational medicine, as well as some of the big research institutes. There's one in Bethesda, there's another one in New London, Connecticut, Pensacola, and Panama City. I'm not going to get into a lot of details, but they offer some really interesting options that are not available to civilian students. So it's not just what you know, it's who you know, and that's why we do these third and fourth annual trainings. It's to have an opportunity to go to a military hospital that somebody is potentially interested in doing their residency at, putting on your uniform, and showing them what you're made of. Be evaluated and interview for a residency spot, see if you like the program directors, and just get familiar with putting on a uniform and being in the military culture. It's quite a bit of culture shock showing up from a civilian program to the military, and so this gives you a little practice. These clerkships are competitive, and so we recommend that students arrange them as early as possible and to get them confirmed. So we can talk a little more about benefits. The benefits start on the last of the following 3 dates. So either the day that you swore in for the oath of office, meaning that you signed the Navy contract and became inactive ready reserve, or the day that you signed the HPSP contract, or the day that medical school started. And so for people on the HPSP scholarship, it's typically the first day of medical school. And the reason why that's significant is that that's the day that you start getting the stipend deposited into your checking account and you start being able to submit reimbursements for books and such. If a student starts school and then decides to take the scholarship after the fact, they still have until the last day of the semester to sign the contract in order to be paid for the tuition starting the first day of the semester. This is just a slide to show the extensive tuition payment process that's involved between the medical school and the financial aid office. Typically, the student is not involved in this. I remember when I started medical school, I was really worried because I got a bill from the financial aid office and that I hadn't paid my tuition. And I called the Navy recruiter and I'm like, what are you talking about? You guys, I signed this contract. And they're like, yeah, sometimes it takes a month or two to get it all processed. Don't worry. And sure enough, it was just fine. In my case, it did take up to about 3 months. So the reimbursement process is easy. You buy the stuff that you need that's required, not stuff that you want. And then you show your documentation that it's required, including the dean's certification. Take it to the financial aid office, they sign off on it, and then the whole package is submitted electronically to MP&E, which is the Navy office that handles that. They review it, and then they direct deposit it back into your checking account. So in an ideal world, we'd recommend that the summer before medical school that everybody would have signed up for their scholarship already and have gone to officer school and gotten their housing, and in reality that doesn't usually happen. Typically students apply November, December of their 4th year of college for the scholarship, and then they start medical school and then the following summer, they typically go to officer developmental school. And it doesn't put them at a disadvantage if they go after the first year of medical school. Second year, we just recommend that students study as hard as they can for step 1 and also for their classes. And then the summer between second and third year, take step 1, and then arrange for their clerkships in their fourth year of medical school. Third year of medical school, students should really just focus on their clinical rotations. So the Navy match is pretty similar to the civilian match. And as a student here at UIC, I participated in both. Like I said, every Navy HPSP student has to participate in the military match, but it doesn't mean that you can't participate in the civilian match. The options that are available are to rank a Navy internship or to rank for a civilian deferment. I ended up doing the full deferment for civilian internship and residency, which is the NADDS program. Because the war is winding down, that program isn't utilized as much as it was when I was a fourth-year student during the height of the war. So there's different training facilities within the Navy. We have one in Bethesda, we have one in San Diego, and we have one in Portsmouth. And then there's also 3 smaller places, one outside of Washington, D.C., one in Pensacola, and one up on the northeast that have family practice residents. In the Navy, you match into internship in December of the fourth year of medical school, and then there's a separate match program for the residency component. It's not, the civilian residency has now combined, although 15 years ago it was 2 separate programs as well. The Navy does not authorize combined residencies, so students interested in emergency medicine combined with internal medicine or IM Med Peds cannot participate in those. Same thing with combined research and residency programs. We can't do those either. It's just one straight residency. Like I said, the internships that are offered, family medicine, which students that match into internship in family medicine almost always go into doing a residency in family medicine immediately after. Same for internal medicine, OB-GYN, pediatrics, and psych. The Navy really values continuity of education for the primary care specialties because those are what the Navy particularly needs right now. The more competitive residencies such as general surgery, neurosurgery, orthopedic surgery, ENT, anesthesia are all done with an internship, and then rats. Excuse me 1 minute, I dropped the clicker. Okay, I'm back. Typically those students do an internship and then they take time to get some real life Navy experience, which I'll talk about in a moment. The locations, like I said before, Bethesda, Portsmouth, San Diego. For the majority of internships, Pensacola, Jacksonville, Pendleton, Bremerton, Camp Lejeune, and Belvoir are all for just family practice. This is a slide just describing the application process, which I just reviewed. And one of the things that's important for students to know is that even if they rotate at a hospital and they do a stellar job and the program director loves them, the program director cannot offer an individual acceptance. The student has to go through the match process, and that's in order to be fair to everybody. So before I had talked about the before I had talked about what it's like to be a civilian resident in terms of the financial package, the Navy does offer a lot of financial perks to trainees. So as residents, They make active duty pay, which is about double what civilian residents make. And then part of their salary includes BAH and BAS, which are tax-free components that are for housing and sustenance. So, and those depend on the location of the residency. Currently, I am stationed in Bethesda, Maryland, and so I make the highest BAH and BAS in the country. People that are in more rural areas make slightly lower BAH and BAS because it's based on the cost of living. As I said before, Illinois students are exempt from state taxes, so if you are a resident of Illinois and you get stationed in Bethesda, Maryland, like I did, I still maintain an Illinois address and Illinois residency, and thus I am exempt from all state taxes. My time that if I would have done a residency in the Navy, that time would have counted toward retirement. Because I did a civilian residency, that time does not count toward any retirement. And residency is a good time to acclimate to Navy culture. I came on active duty as an attending physician, and I was immediately required to have collateral duties and participate in boards, and it was just something that I didn't understand the formalities of, and it was hard to learn as I was going along. And another thing is that the Navy has a retirement savings program called TSP, Thrift Savings Program. Residents are able to contribute toward this. After a while, after so many years, the military does contribute a very small percentage, but I think it's a 4-year commitment. And then also there's active duty perks like using morale, welfare, and recreation services, like buying discounted tickets to amusement parks and concerts and physical fitness centers, using commissaries, which are military grocery stores, and exchange, which is like a military mall. The Navy active duty delay for specialist program, also known as civilian deferments, is very difficult to obtain right now because there's not a huge need for specialists since the war is winding down. Should somebody elect to do this, the time that they spend in residency is neutral. It doesn't incur additional time, but at the same time you don't get anything for it. You get your civilian pay and you don't get anything toward retirement. And the resident is then paid by that institution, not the Navy. In the past, during wartime, there was a need for emergency medicine, general surgery, neurosurgery, orthopedics, radiology, and anesthesia. Typically, psychiatry, pediatrics, OB-GYN are almost essentially never deferred. So in order to participate in the HPSP program, students need to be U.S. citizens. They cannot hold dual citizenship. The Navy will help you resign your citizenship from another country, but it is a legal process that has to be pursued. Students must be physically qualified and accepted into an accredited school. So allopathic and osteopathic schools in the U.S. are acceptable that have full accreditation. Schools in Puerto Rico are also fine. Schools in the Caribbean are not considered American schools and thus are not allowed for this program. And then the other thing is that students need to be younger than 42 years old at the time of graduation. So options after internship. So students that are interested in doing the more competitive residencies such as anesthesia, surgery, neurosurgery, orthopedic surgery, will most likely need to pursue a general medical officer tour. And that involves spending 1 to 3 years in a capacity of something like a general practitioner. It's somebody that has a medical license but that has not yet completed a residency. And so options are flight surgery, undersea medicine, ship duty, or working in a military treatment facility in the role of a primary care physician. All GMOs must have completed an internship successfully and have a medical license. Flight surgery continues to be a very popular option, and it was something that I was also very interested in at the time. It is a 3-year experience, which includes 6 months at the ground school in Pensacola, Florida. So you go to school with the pilots at ground school. And after flight school, you spend about 7 hours a week minimum flying in aircraft with pilots. One of my residents, who's a good friend of mine, told me that the pilot would take off and that hand off the controls of the aircraft to him, and then when it was time to land the aircraft, then the pilot would take the control back over. But they work very intimately with the pilots and their families. And part of the reason why they have the flight surgeons spend so much time in the air is so that they can gain the trust of the pilots and understand all the medical needs of the pilots and understand what can disqualify pilots from flying. Flight surgeons are not surgeons, though. That is a misnomer. Speaking of flight surgery, this is a view from altitude of Afghanistan. And this is coming into Kandahar Airfield. This is a typical trauma bay. And this is an Army trauma bay. This is not a Navy one. The Navy does not allow us to have photographs, and I borrowed these from one of my Army residents. This is my resident being silly in the trauma bay. This is a triage unit. So the guy that's laying on the stretcher is in the initial triage bay where they come in and they assess people for what level they're going to be triaged at, and then go to decontamination. And the guy in the middle with the lieutenant, or I'm sorry, with the double bars, looks like a Navy lieutenant. It's an Army captain. He's my resident. Undersea medicine, I don't have any pictures of, but it's a very similar experience, except instead of taking care of pilots, you take care of the Navy SEALs and their families. And the people that pursue undersea medicine are expected to participate in a certain amount of BUDS training and then ultimately help take care of people during their stint at BUDS training. One thing that I didn't discuss was that students that decide to take the HPSP scholarship are not able to take any other financial aid that it's supported by the government. So people that are living in high-cost areas like Manhattan or Chicago, if the stipend doesn't fully cover the cost of living expenses, those students have to pursue private loans. They're not able to take government-subsidized loans. And this is a link to the Navy HPSP website with the most up-to-date information. And here is the contact information. Thank you very much. And if there's any questions, I would like to entertain those at this time. If there are any questions from those of you participating in the webinar, you can contact me. My contact information is on the first slide of the presentation, or we have the recruiter information available for the recruiters in the Great Lakes region. Thank you very much, and I appreciate you listening in today.